Well, I am excited to be here this morning, but on an interesting note, this morning we are talking about money. So if you are one of those people who doesn't like talking about that in church, you are probably thinking right now, I wish I was on a lake somewhere. I wish I would have slept in. Maybe could have been golfing, multiple of other things. Maybe it would have been a good week for a vacation. If you're online, you might be thinking, should I click that little X at the top of the box and just go on to something else? But I am really excited about what we're going to walk through this morning. And I am not the perfect person to talk about money. I'm not always calm and cool when it comes to money. In fact, as I was preparing, I thought about this story from kind of the end of last year. It was November and December, and I got two different calls directly related to finances that made my stomach drop. The first had to do with our car. Our car was not a nice car, but it was nice enough for us. It was a Chevy Equinox. It had gotten us from here to there, costing a little more money than I would have liked, but it did the job. I was on my way to my parents to go hunting, and in Toma, which is literally the halfway point, my car just died. I had enough in it to get to the side of the road. I had to sit there and wait for a tow truck, which was fun, and just sat there. And we bring it into the car dealership or the automotive place, and I know nothing about cars, so I have no clue how much this is going to cost. So I go to my friendly friend of Google and put it in, and it says it's going to cost anywhere from $200 to $5,000 or more to fix my car. That's quite the range. And so the first call was about the car. A few days later, I get a call from the auto shop, and they tell me, it's not the $200 option. It was a $10,000 fix. I don't even think we paid $10,000 for that vehicle. And in my heart, I immediately jumped to, what can I do? Maybe my parents would give us a loan. Can I sue Chevy? They knew this was a problem with the engine. You can't. So I just went through all these different things of what can I do to make this right, to make this work. You know, we move on from that a little bit, decide we're going to be a one-car family for a little while. And a week later, we have the last home inspection on this home remodel project that was just awful. Took forever. We found out all this stuff that was not done correctly the first go around. And we are thousands of dollars of getting our house up to code. And we have the last home inspection. And they come in and they're like, the work done here is great. It's really good. But as I look up, I wonder if this house was a flip. And I think, yes, it was. And they say, because it looks like the work up there was never permitted either. And because you currently own the house, you're responsible for that. And we need to decide if we're going to have you do it. And so I actually received the rest of that information on another phone call. And so I'm thinking, we might have to tear up some floor, tear up the walls, and get it back to code. And the dollar signs are just going through my head of how much this could ultimately cost us. And in that, I start thinking through, who did the work originally? What if I go back to them and figure out is there a way to hold them responsible? And I found out most of the time with a person doing a flip, there's not, because they're moved on. And in that moment, there were all these things going through my head. But you know what I never did? I never just sat back and asked the Lord, hey, what do you want from us in this moment? What does it look like to trust you right now? It took time, and it took other people helping me see, like, hey, all this planning, all this thinking through what you could do is not bad, but what if you just went to the Lord first? And I wonder how many of us are like that when it comes to finances. When it comes to money, we run through all the different scenarios in our head of how we can fix it or how we can make this work or what we can do with our money, and rarely do we bring the Lord into it. And I wish it was just true like this for me in big situations, but I get anxious over small financial things. I find out that Hillary went to Target to buy something that could have been bought at Walmart, and I'm like, that's $2 more. Was it really worth it? And she tells me, yes, it's worth it to go to Target instead. But that's how my mind works when it comes to finances. I just get anxious. I get worked up. And so as we talk about money this morning, as we look at James talking about money, James is going to be very direct. And there's going to be moments where I think we want to check out from what James is saying, act like that's not for us. But I think what he has to say is incredibly insightful for us today. So we're going to continue on in James chapter 4, and we're going to go into chapter 5. And there's two sections that feel a little distinct, but they're actually connected by one phrase. And it's this phrase that says, now listen. Twice, James says, now listen, because he's about to warn us. He's about to warn the church, the people that he's writing to, about something going on. This phrase should bring up kind of the feeling in your stomach if at work your boss said, hey, can you come to my office? And as you walk into the office, your boss says, also close the door, there's something we need to talk about. At that point, your stomach drops. You think, what have I done? When James uses that phrase, now listen, it means lean in. There's a warning coming for you. And so James is about to give a strong warning about money to the church. And so we're going to pick up in chapter 4, verse 13, when he says this. He says, now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city and spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you don't know even what you will do tomorrow or what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows what is good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So, James starts with this direct teaching, which this is the second time I've preached in James. The first time there was something that I had read multiple times and I missed part of it. I have read this section of James multiple times before, and I didn't see the connection to money here. I thought it was something about planning and when planning goes bad. But if you notice it, James says that you're going to go this place or that, carry on in business, and make money. What James is talking about here, he's talking about this planning that moves from planning to trusting in yourself, this self-reliance that I'm going to plan, that I'm going to do these things so that I make the money that I want to make. And James's response to that is, you're a mist. Who are you to make these plans? You're here today and gone tomorrow. Why are you relying on yourself? And he goes on to even say, you boast in your arrogant schemes. You make these plans, and then you get to a point where you think, look at what I did. I'm the one who's provided all of this. It's me. You give yourself the little pat on the back. I did it. Great job. And James is warning against that because he knows how easy it is when it comes to wealth and money for us to move from relying on God to relying on ourselves, both in how we plan to get money and how we plan to use it. It's easy for us to slide into self-reliance. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking there's kind of three different options that we can have with how we treat finances. How do we bring the Lord in, if at all? And I think the first one that's maybe the most common in the church is that we plan and then we ask God to approve it. Like we make a plan, like, hey, this seems like a really good idea. And then we're like, I know God's supposed to be a part of this somewhere. And so before we do it, we just ask him to kind of give his stamp of approval. Like, hey, I want to do this. Here's my case, God. And you just think God's going to do it. What normally happens then is God always says yes. You plan, God always approves. So then what starts to happen is you plan and then you approve. Because why have the middleman anymore? Why have God in there approving what you know he's already going to approve? You just move forward. This is where it becomes arrogant. You think, I don't even need to go to God. He really trusts me with my finances. I know what I'm doing. But what if there was a third option? I think this is what James is pointing to, is this third option where God directs, but we don't step away and not do anything. But under God's direction, we plan alongside him how we are going to use, how we are going to get money, how we're going to do that. So a simple example from our life, back when we were living in Minnesota, we didn't have a ton of money a lot of the time we were there, and there was this one month where I was doing our budget, and I found out there was this thing we were paying for that we weren't going to have to pay for anymore, and we had $60 every month that we didn't have before. And I thought, this is amazing, because I had long desired to have cable TV. This is back when you didn't just get everything from Netflix and other streaming services. You needed cable. And I was living in Minnesota where I couldn't watch the Packers, and I wanted to watch the Packers and other things. I'm sure I spiritualized it too, but that's really what I wanted. And it cost like $59.99 a month. And I was like, this is perfect. God created the window for $60. I am going to get cable. And I think I ran through the, God, will you approve this? Here's why. I'm going to host people. We're going to have people over to watch these games. I had a great reason for why we should do it. And the morning the cable company is supposed to come, I'm sitting there in my time with the Lord, and this sermon pops into my head where the lead pastor talked about how what he did with his kids as they were growing up, him and the wife each took each kid on a date each month. So the mom took the son and the daughter, and the dad took the son and the daughter, and he said it was the best use of our money that we'd ever had. And I thought, come on. I probably need to ask the Lord if I should do this then. And so I go back, and it's almost like I jumped to the third option. Finally, God brings it before me. I was like, God, what do you want us to do with this $60? It seems trivial. It's only $60. And really quickly, he's like, you should do the date thing. I think, come on. So I call Hillary, get her opinion, call her, and she immediately, who's spiritually sometimes more attuned than I am, says, yeah, we should do the date thing. That seems like a better use of our money. And honestly, this past week, I just did both dates with my kids. We have been doing it now for 8 years. Kate and I had a great conversation over dumplings, Chinese dumplings, of what's going on in her life. Yesterday, I went with Elijah. I embarrassed myself in a batting cage. I thought I'd be really good. I was not. But those are memories that we can have with our kids. I would not trade that for anything. It was the best use of that money. Now, if you have cable or spend $60 a month on all the different streaming services out there, this isn't a condemnation on that at all. It was just a reality for me that I had not even brought the Lord into the discussion. And that's what I think James is getting at here, is we need to move from self-reliance to trusting God with our finances. And to do that, we actually have to bring him in to the process and let him guide it. Now, it would be convicting enough for me if James stopped there, but he keeps going. So we're going to pick up in chapter 5, where he says, now listen again. So lean in. I got one more thing for you here. He says, you rich people weep and wail because of the misery that is coming to you. Deep breath, right? Your wealth has... Sorry, I have to say this. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. Another deep breath. You have hoarded wealth in these last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who is not opposing you. So we move to this next warning. And it's a warning. If the first warning was a warning against self-reliance, this one is against self-indulgence. It's spending my money on myself. It's how do I get and accumulate more? And here's the reality. Most people, when you start talking about greed, think this is a great topic for someone else. There's always someone else more greedy than me. Pastor Tim Keller, who passed away recently, he gave a sermon series on the 7 deadly sins. And he said the lowest attended one was the one on greed. And the one where almost nobody came up to confess sin to him was the one on greed. And he has this quote from one of his books that I love. He says this: says the Bible talks about money 20 to 30 times more than it talks about sex. Why? Because money's spiritual power blinds us to itself. When people are committing adultery, they know they're doing it, but hardly anyone who loves money too much knows they do. People are always confessing sexual sins, but almost no one thinks I'm materialistic or greedy. Goes on to say, but if A, the Bible continually warns us about the danger of materialism, yet almost no one thinks they're guilty of it, then C, it means a great number of people are blinded to and by the power of money in their lives. The only responsible thing to do is to go on the working hypothesis that we are all infected by materialism and greed and must be on watch for it. If materialism is this insidious and stupefying, it's like a lot like alcoholism. Maybe the best sign of materialism is this: you aren't even willing to admit the possibility that you are enslaved to greed. I listened to a sermon on Tim Keller talking about greed, and I thought maybe we should just have him talk about it this morning and just play it. But I think there's so much in what he says there. Because we can see that section in James and be like, I'm not doing any of this. I'm not a big-time landowner with all these different employees. But if you look at what James is actually calling out there in self-indulgence, first, he's calling out hoarding of wealth. He says, you who hoard your wealth. And the thing about hoarding is you can do this with a little bit of money. My kids don't have a lot of money, but they can hoard that little bit of money that they have. Or you can do it with a lot. You don't need a lot to hoard your money. And you can notice you're hoarding your money by the emotions you have when you're worried it might be taken away. When the stock market goes like this or this, what's your natural response? You can see, how do we hoard what we have in front of us? And then he talks about living in luxury. And this is easy too, because I always assume there's way more people who are living more luxurious than me. I just have to go on social media. There's people taking trips I could never afford. But at the same time, it's easy for us to pursue comfort and joy in our financial things in ways that were meant to come from the Lord. One of my best friends from college, he left after college, he went and did ministry, and we would go hang out with them every once in a while. And after like our second or third time hanging out with them post-college, it would have been about 3 or 4 years, Hillary and I left the conversation saying, did you notice they just talked a lot more about money than they ever used to? They talked about trips that they wanted to go on and this new house that they wanted to get. And we didn't think a lot of it. And then we met with them again, and the same thing happened to a higher degree. And we started to notice a correlation. The more they talked about money and the things they wanted to do, the less they talked about Jesus. The less they talked about their walk with the Lord. To the point where the last time I remember hanging out with them, all they talked about was their stuff. And he was in a process of deconstructing his faith. But it started so small. And what happened was, as I look back on it, they were finding their comfort, their joy, and all these other things now through material possessions and trips and all these things that are not bad in and of themselves. If you're going on a vacation next week, this is not the talk that's telling you you can't do that. But what they were supposed to find from the Lord, they were now finding through all these things. And Keller, in that quote, used the phrase, it's insidious. Like it's small, and it gets in there, and it almost leads us to this point of numbing us. And I think that's such a great picture of what pursuing self-indulgence can do. We don't even know it's happening. And then all of a sudden, we're in a place we never thought we would be. And what James says is it doesn't just affect us. It affects how we relate to other people. Do you notice how he talked about what this pursuit of wealth can do? It can cause you to fraud other people. Talks about not paying the laborers. Because what happens is when the pursuit of wealth becomes the end means for us, other people are either a competition to us, So think of the person at work with you who all of a sudden you talk a little less kind about them because you're both up for the same promotion. So you don't want them to get the credit for stuff. You want you to get the credit for stuff because they're a competition to you getting the position that you want to get so that you can have the money that you want to have. And that's really simple to do. So they can become a competition, but they can also just become a means to your end. They can be employees or customers you mistreat so that you make more profit. There's all these different things that can happen, that people start to lose their dignity and worth because they just become a means to our end to make more. And then James ends his section. That's where he ends it. There is not this super exciting or really good moment where James says, but here's how you should handle your money. He doesn't do that. He actually just moves on to another thought. And if we hadn't been in James this whole time, we might be left wondering, what was that all about? Is he saying there's no real hope here? There's nothing we can really do with our wealth and finances? Is he just saying all money is bad? Well, the answer is no, because if you remember, we said multiple times that James is a circular book, where James will bring something up, he'll go on for another chapter, and then he'll start talking about something else, referencing something he brought up earlier. And we may have missed it, but in chapter 2, James talked about money in a different way. He talked about a better way for us to handle our money when he started talking about faith and works, or works, faith and deeds. And he said that these are the things that help us see where our faith is at. If you look at chapter 2 of James, this is what he says when he's talking about faith and deeds. He says, suppose a brother or a sister without clothes and there's a brother or sister without clothes or daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm, be well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself that is not accompanied by actions is dead. James, when talking about faith that is authentic, faith that is genuine, he actually uses a material example of how our faith can be lived out. He says, if you just look at somebody in wealth who or somebody in need and are like, well, good luck. I wish the best for you, but I'm going to keep what I have. James said, what kind of faith is that? Because what James would say is faith is just the example of, is the reality of trusting God. But too often now we think faith is simply trusting God with your salvation, which is 100% true. Don't take that and make me say that it's not. Faith is 100% trusting God for your salvation, but it's actually trusting God with all of your life. Genuine faith is faith that gives its full allegiance to Jesus and says, what you have for me is what I want to do. And so James says that kind of faith that gives Jesus our full trust, our full allegiance, should have an outworking that's different. And so what he says is that outworking in his example, the deed, would be to help the brother or sister in need. In a self-sacrificial way, because when you help someone, it comes from you. Like there is money, or there is time, or there is probably both that you are going to give up. But it's an outworking of this faith where Jesus has it all. And you've put your trust in him, and now he is working through you to see money in a whole different way. That it's a way to love and bless others. And there's actually a really interesting case study of a person like this in the Bible, and it's not the person you would expect it to be. It's a man named Zacchaeus. And so if you know the story of Zacchaeus, maybe it's from Sunday school when they talk about him being a wee little man, but there's a lot more to this Zacchaeus. And in Luke 19, we see the story of Zacchaeus. It says this: Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he couldn't see over the crowd, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see Jesus. And since Jesus was coming that way, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So Zacchaeus came down at once and welcomed Jesus gladly. And the people who saw this began to mutter, "Jesus has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay it back 4 times that amount." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come on this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." So why do I say Zacchaeus is a perfect case study for this idea of what James is building throughout his book? Well, if you notice, it says Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. He actually goes out his way. He climbs up a tree. He sees Jesus. Jesus then initiates. He welcomes him in. Zacchaeus, who would have been thought to be so far outside of what Jesus should have done, Jesus, in his words later, came to seek and save the lost like Zacchaeus. And so he welcomes Zacchaeus in. And all of a sudden, Zacchaeus' language changed to where he calls Jesus Lord. All of a sudden, he moves in this short instance to saying, "Jesus, you are my master. You are my Lord." That phrase signifies trust and reliance and obedience. Zacchaeus, in a short moment, has trusted that Jesus is his Lord. And did you notice the almost instantaneous outworking of that faith in Zacchaeus' life? This man of great wealth, he says, "I'm going to give away half of what I own to the poor." That is above and beyond what we often think of as the tithe, like 10%. Zacchaeus blows that out of the water. He said, "I will give half of what I have." And he says, "If I cheated anyone, I will give them 4 times what I cheated from them." That's on top of what the Old Testament would have called Zacchaeus to. It was over double what the Old Testament would have called him to. Because in Zacchaeus, what we're seeing is that when someone's life is transformed or redeemed by the gospel, it redeems our view of money. Completely transforms it. You have someone who in that moment would have been hoarding their wealth. Zacchaeus would have been overtaxing people to get more. And in one interaction with Jesus, everything changes. His whole view of money and how he uses his money. You see, Zacchaeus feels like a cute story that we think, wow, look at how Jesus met that guy who was on the outside. But it's also a challenge to us. Because if someone who is a tax collector, frauding people, doing all this stuff in one interaction with Jesus is going to have a whole redeemed view of money, what should be true of us who've been in the church for a while? How should we view money? And I think it challenges us to think of how much of our view of finances and wealth come from the broader culture and how much comes from Jesus himself. Because it's really easy to sprinkle a little Jesus on the cultural value of money and think we're doing it right. But Zacchaeus let Jesus transform everything. And what would be true of us if that happened? How would we view our finances? You see, last week, Brian, when talking about desire, he said desire is neutral. And I would say money is neutral. Planning around your money is neutral. Those things can be good or bad, depending how we do it. They can be such a blessing, though. There are countless examples of people who use their wealth in ways to bless others, big and small. I could share stories from people in this church who do that. Because when it's used rightly, stewarding the resources, the gifts that God has given us in finance is a beautiful picture to the outside world. Our money is a gift from God, It's something he has given us, that we get to trust him, that we get to move away from self-reliance and trust him with what we could do with it. And we move away from self-indulgence and thinking, how can it benefit me, to how can it bless those around me? How can I use it to honor the Lord? And like so much of James, there's not this practical application. There's not the 3 steps to financial stewardship that comes from James. But I think it is a great principle that he gives us. That it's found in self-sacrifice. That we can see our relationship with money with the deeds of how we use it. But we live in a God who's not condemning us. If we have used it wrongly, we can go right back to him, who wants to help us. Even in my example of cable TV, I didn't want to go to him with that. But he was so sweet to me, and it's been one of the best decisions. And that's small. So even if there's conviction, you've got a God who loves you, whose grace is abounding, and who wants to work alongside you to see that wealth and finances, to see that be used for his glory and his kingdom. Let me pray. Jesus, we thank you so much that you trust us even to use wealth in a way that honors and brings glory to you. We thank you for the ways that time and time again we see that you are our provider, and that you challenge us to see how that can be used in a way that moves your kingdom forward. Amen.